Hi, I'm Michael McCullough with Willard Library. Welcome to a special edition of Stories at Sundown. Today, we're going to pay tribute to the memory of the late Dean O. Barnum. Barnum, who passed away in August 2020 at the age of 87, was a beloved professor at Kellogg Community College, an avid book reader, and a conservationist and nature lover. Barnum was also an accomplished investor. Before his passing, Barnum established three $1 million trust funds bequeathed to Kellogg Community College, Willard Library, and Michigan Conservation Clubs, the largest single donation in each of those organizations' history. In commemoration on June 9th, Willard Library will dedicate its outdoor amphitheater at the Helen Warner branch in Barnum's name. And here today to share memories of Professor Barnum is Liz Neumeyer, herself a beloved professor at KCC, thanks to Professor Barnum, who hired her in 1968. Boy, time flies, right, Liz?
It does.
Welcome, Liz, and thank you for joining us. Really glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here to talk about Dean. He was an excellent person and an excellent boss.
Yeah, I wish I'd have known him personally, but I've got to learn a lot about him just talking to you and reading some of the archives. So we just have a few questions, and I just want to pick your brain a little bit. How did you meet Professor Barnum, and what do you think your first impressions were of each other back in 1968?
Well, in May of 1968, they called me to come and do an interview at KCC. I was ecstatic. I got in my 56 Chevrolet, praying it would hold and got to the campus, which was gorgeous. I remember as I walked up it's May, everything's in bloom. It was a sunny day, and I thought, oh, please, dear God, make them offer me this job. And the first person I met was the dean in terms of title, Dean Paul Heath, who was the liberal arts dean, and Dean. And they were the ones who interviewed me through the day, took me out to lunch. And I think the impressions Dean and I had of each other is that we were both very scholarly. I mean, scholarly qualities were important to Dean. And he knew that my thesis was well accepted. In fact, it was going to be published, which is a great coup at the age that I was.
Yeah.
In Michigan History Magazine. I was going to present it to the Michigan History Society, to their annual meeting. I could tell just from the way Dean talked that he was the same type of person.
Yeah.
And he was very welcoming. People often talk about Dean being a gentleman, and I would agree. He was a very traditional gentleman sort of person, and super scholarly. In fact, that part scared me. It scared me the whole first year I was teaching, because the man obviously knew more than I did.
Yeah.
And so I had to live up to his expectations.
Yeah.
I thought. He never made me feel that way, but I thought I had to do that.
No, I know you. You put a lot of pressure on yourself anyway. But
Totally.
that word keeps coming up as you talk about those two words, gentleman and scholar. Yeah. Help us know who the man was, and why would he choose these institutions to be so generous with in his passing?
Well, when it comes to KCC, I think, the obvious, he was always very pro-student. All of the students liked him, even though he was a very strict professor, but I never heard anything negative about Dean. And students were quick to tell me if that was the case. So he was quite strict about what they were supposed to learn. He valued education, obviously, with his own history, but he also valued helping the students. And so that's where most of the money is going, to scholarships. He also valued sports himself. When we played basketball, it's called the NBA, the Noontime Basketball Association.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Yes, that's very popular. So we named the auditorium, the new auditorium, at the new Miller building after him. And his signature is embedded in the floor of the place. And actually, he knew that was going to happen before he died. And he actually came to tears. He was so affected by that. When it comes to Willard, Dean was frugal, but not when it came to books. In fact, I didn't realize he was so ill. He called me and said, Liz, I need someone to help me get my books to a good home. 2 days later, he was dead. I was just, floored. But I did get them to a good home the way that he wanted, at least his history books. I talked with his niece, Susan. We talked about some other alternatives with his hunting books and his bird and animal books and so on. But so the Historical Society Archives and the Regional History Museum each have things that I thought were appropriate to go to each one. Anyway, perfectly logical to me that Dean would give money to Willard because of his love of books and that they should be available to the public. I mean, he wouldn't have done this for any kind of private library. He was concerned about the public.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had. I mean, you kind of touch on it all the time, but I mean, what did he believe in? I mean, what were the things he believed in?
Well, the local community. Dean was, this is an old-fashioned word now. I wish more people knew it because I feel the same way myself. It's called the commonweal.
Yeah.
And that is the good of the community. I mean, we've gone so far the other extreme of thinking about individual rights all the time. But it's like some people have forgotten that. Dean was a very civil person. I don't recall ever seeing him angry, except when he told me one story, which I can share with you later, about his getting a PhD. But Dean was very focused on, just to give you one little example, minor example, he wouldn't go to any businesses that weren't local. To the end of his days, he went to local pharmacies, for instance.
Yeah.
And he made that point to me one time for something. When I was younger here and deciding whether I should stay here or not, Dean was valuable about telling me, this plumber is good. All of these different little details you need to know about the community. This particular pharmacy is great. You want to talk to this person. In fact, he connected me with Bernice Bryant Lowe, which was like, stardom getting to meet her and going down to the Kimball House. So I think it was love of community. I mean, the signs we have now are the bumper stickers, believe in Battle Creek. He'd be right there with that. He believed in his family. He was a community person.
Yeah. This isn't one of the prepared questions, and I told you I might do that, but
that's okay. I'll make something up.
Yeah, there you go. No, but I did, of course, a little bit of research, preparing to talk to you. He was obviously very involved in the community, but it wasn't in a high title kind of way. It wasn't a running things kind of way. He was just contributing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that. For instance, he was active in the Democratic Party, but he wasn't, because his brother at one time was a county commissioner and he helped him run. But no, he wasn't. I think for a while he was a student advisor, but by the time I came along, it had passed on to somebody else. His activities were more low key. Dean knew a lot of things. I mean, that man was a smart man, but he was not, I'll quote his niece, Susan, he was not a know-it-all. He was not a braggart. He was very humble. He didn't bore you to death with things that he knew unless you asked him. He was just, I think he was just a very family-oriented community type of individual. That's what he believed in, being the best person you could be.
Yeah. And so he was an accomplished scholar, and we're already kind of answering the question, but I mean, it seems like to me, just reading about him and his knowledge, and you have some other examples to share of just how smart he was, but he really could have gone anywhere, but he put his roots down here where he had roots and stayed and contributed. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because he was centered on his family. I think even if he had gone on to teach at a four-year college, he would have worked to be around here. I mean, he would have commuted, like to Michigan State or Western, the places where he was a student. I don't think he wasn't that much of a traveler, unless it was hunting or outdoor recreational things. I think he was rooted in his family. His niece, for instance, spoke very well of Uncle Dean and how helpful he always was. In fact, he left the house to her because she helped him in his final days, final year.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that he was frugal and almost all things, books being the exception, and the outdoors and his love of hunting, another one of those, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I knew Dean was well off because he told me that one time and about investing in stocks. And Kellogg's used to come out to our campus all the time, and he always going to Kellogg. I think that's how he started, if I remember right. He made it big. He worked at Kellogg's, and he spent his money investing in them. Rather, he didn't blow it on like cars. I don't remember having a fancy car. He stayed with his parents.
Mm-hmm.
So, although I think he had a separate house at one point, but he stayed in the family home. He was just a frugal fellow.
Yeah.
And one time, just to show you his humanity, the history enrollment dropped at KCC, and one of the younger teachers who had 4 kids and all of whom had medical problems of one sort or another, would have had to take a reduced load. Dean said, "No, I'll take the reduced load."
Wow.
That way, that man stayed. A lot of students would know him. There's Mr. Pratt, Chuck Pratt.
Wow.
So Chuck had a full time. He got the medical, So, and I knew Dean said he could afford it. I knew he could. But I was still astounded at the $3 million. That still astounded me.
Yeah, I don't think anybody expected that.
No, $1 million. I wouldn't. Yeah.
Sure.
But no, wow, I was just astounded.
Well, you brought us something a minute ago, and I'm going to go ahead and press you on it. I made a mistake in preparing for this. In writing my intro and my questions, I referred to him as doctor. And he said actually he didn't receive his doctorate. And there's a story behind that I think says something about him as well. Why don't you relate that?
Oh, yes. What happened to Dean, he told me this story one time. And the reason he did is because I thought about getting a doctorate. So Dean was trying to be helpful and warning me about the potential problem. I had heard of this before, but it didn't happen to me with my thesis. Basically, when you do a thesis or a dissertation, it has to be on a subject no one else has ever done. Well, what happened was Dean did his dissertation on some Michigan governor. I forgot who it was, but someone in the midst of it, he had his dissertation done. He had done all this, and it's very time consuming, I can tell you, having done a thesis. And it takes a long time, and they wouldn't accept it because his book had been published. So he just walked out. Yeah, it wasn't fair. And nowadays, most of the time, you sign a contract. The college signs a contract with you that this is your thesis dissertation topic. I didn't experience that myself, and then I decided not to go for a doctorate because at a community college, I think it's better to have a broader background. So I went into psychology and communication too.
Okay.
Which turned out to be a benefit to me because sometimes when history enrollment would drop, I could do that, and I wouldn't have to displace one of the younger teachers. I had more versatility.
Oh, sure. Well, what it said to me was also just kind of he valued the he focused on the intrinsic value of what he was doing, not necessarily the titles or the accolades. And it didn't take away from the fact that he had that level of expertise and scholarship. And he knew that about himself. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes. We used to try to fool him. He could have been on Jeopardy, I'm sure.
I love this story.
But we used to try and fool him, and we had this big, thick dictionary, and an unabridged dictionary in the department. So we'd be looking through it and try to catch Dean. Well, one time, Jerry Peterson, who taught political science, thought he had the perfect thing. He found the name of some obscure Byzantine coin. I don't remember the coin name now. I just remember the Byzantine coin. And Dean knew it. He did the New York Times puzzle and ink. He knew all that stuff. And so we just gave up. We stopped teasing him about when we asked him a question, he was like Google before the days of Google. Dean, what about thus and so? And he would know the answer. Sometimes if he didn't, he would know the broad category, and he'd know who you should go talk to about. I'm talking about community things now, not historical information. He knew all that. In fact, I know zip when I came here about the Kellogg's. That there were 2 of them. I didn't know the difference between one Kellogg and the other. And so I learned all that stuff from Dean.
Yeah, yeah. So, what kind of teacher was he? What did his students think of
He was a
Professor
very
Barnum?
strict traditional teacher, very demanding. I think one time he told me his trick to make sure the students paid attention to everything is his first test, he would do it all on the book. So they'd lull themselves into thinking, oh, I just have to read the book. And then the next one, he'd hit them all with his lectures. So, and of course, that never bothered me because I learned everything. In history, I mean, I read the captions underneath the pictures.
Yeah.
Because you always had professors that would ask some question like that. And it was easy for me as I went to a church school, a Lutheran school. We memorized stuff all the time. I could memorize anything. I seem to be losing that skill as I age. But anyway, but the students loved him. I had never heard any student say anything negative. And if you look at his obituary and know where they can put legacies, there were a number of students that commented on Dean. Also commented on how active he was in high school, doing things. So, he was well thought of.
Yeah. Well, and that reflects, I think, students can dislike a tough teacher or professor, but they obviously must have felt that he was trying to help them learn. Wasn't just trying to catch them in anything.
Yeah, not if they're fair. I mean, Dean was fair.
Yeah.
So it's not like he went out of his way to do some picky thing that no reasonable student would know, even if they memorized the entire book. So he was fair in terms of what he presented, and he was a good lecturer. He was a good storyteller. And as like I said, the students liked him. In fact, in 1967, this was just before I came, the KCC Student Senate chose him as Teacher of the Year. Outstanding. I think the title was Outstanding Teacher of the Year.
Wow. So, knowing him, what would he say about this dedication today? Or if he were here, what would he say about this dedication in his name, do you think?
Well, as I said, he was a humble, modest man. So I think he would be very emotional, just like he was with the basketball court. And because he was an outdoorsman, he was a hunter, very avid hunter, very responsible hunter, concerned about conservation. In fact, that's, I think, why he gave the money to the United Conservation Club. It's the oldest club, was formed in Michigan in 1937, and it's actually a federation of clubs, all with the same purpose, which is to preserve Michigan natural resources for outdoor recreation. So, I mean, he picked, it's probably like he picked stocks, he picked well.
Yeah.
And he was a member of it also. And so I think he would be happy that they're doing. In fact, the Michigan United Conservation Club is putting at our campus, they're putting up bird boxes, wood for wood ducks, and they're going to recondition the Spring Lakes, Spring Lake is really deteriorated. We used to have canoe classes and kayaking, all sorts of stuff. And there's all these invasive species. So they're going to help clean it up. And I think the outdoor amphitheater, it served the same purpose. And presumably, if you have programs on the out of doors, I think that would make Dean even happier.
So what else would you like folks to remember about your friend?
Well, I think the main thing was his sense of place. I mean, Dean and I were in sync on this. I believe in the commonweal. You have to love your community. You have to think of the community welfare as well as your own individual welfare. And the same thing with students. Dean was helpful to students. I'm always, right now we have a fund called Beyond Tuition that helps students in emergencies. I think Dean was just a well-loved, decent man. I remember one time I said, okay, I'm going to move from Marshall. I was living in Marshall. I'm going to move over to Kalamazoo because it's easier to take my master's classes over there. So there's Dean, along with several other guys, loading up all my furniture and then hauling it up to a second floor apartment where they had to shift over some kind of balcony to get the couch. And I mean, so he would always do stuff like that. He was always there doing that sort of thing. It helped that we were all younger.
That always helps, right?
Yeah, that always.
Especially on moving day.
But I just would like people to know how decent a man he was.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing these reflections. I wish I'd have had the opportunity to meet him in life, but it's wonderful to have this legacy and to be able to pay tribute to him. And a reminder to viewers, there is a dedication of the amphitheater on June 9th at the Willard Library's Helen Warner branch. Thank you again, Liz. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
All right.